Este é o Poder Entrevista em sua versão internacional. Eu sou Guilherme Valtenberg e vou conversar com a economista-chefe da Iata, que é a companhia que representa em plano internacional as empresas aéreas, Owens Thomsen. Mary, thank you very much for this kind interview.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, global airline industry is expected to grow more than 4% in 2025. It's going to reach $1 trillion for the first time in history. Has the pandemic been overcome?
Yes, it has been overcome in terms of the level of activity. We now surpass the 2019 level. But, I think in general, with respect to any crisis, a mistake to think that you ever overcome them because they leave scars. Yeah. And we carry some of the consequences with us as we go forward. Hopefully, we also carry some learning from the various crises also going forward. And I think that, the coverage, the network composition, even if we have the surpassed in terms of total activity level, the network compositions, the routes we fly, and the frequency on those routes is not the same today as it was in 2019. And I also hope that, that airlines showed great imagination and creativity in terms of responding to this crisis in 2020. And I hope that the regulators have really learned something from that crisis and understand that a knee-jerk response, unharmonized responses, changing responses frequently, all of those things were really detrimental not only to the airline industry, of course, but to the whole global economy.
So how has that how have those cars changed? Completely the industry, not necessarily completely, but how have they changed the industry?
The routes, the
scars you mentioned that the pandemic left in the sector.
Yes, I think that again, airlines have shown how creative they are. And how important, maybe there was, if there's a lasting learning for airlines, maybe it's about cargo and how we all saw that without cargo, it would have been so much worse, obviously, during the pandemic. Yeah, they were really the source of revenue that came to the rescue, was the cargo revenue. And I hope that maybe we can integrate and give more strategic importance to cargo going forward. That would be an important thing to take away from the pandemic, I think, for our industry. Now, again, for the regulators, I hope that they understand that they were obviously the ones who stopped the traffic. I hope they have understood that when you then want to restart the traffic, it's not like a switch of light in your house. You can't just turn it back on and boom, you're ready to go. I hope that the regulators have seen how we need absolutely everybody, the airport staff, the security staff, even back to the consulates and the people who process visas. There were bottlenecks in all of those areas, even before you come into the airlines operations. And those chain reactions, I think, were obviously poorly understood going into the crisis. I hope they're a little bit better understood now that we've had that experience.
Profitability is also likely to grow next year. So how's the financial health of the sector at this moment?
Yeah, the airline industry is one that has always been characterized by low margins. And the airline industry lives in a very skewed value chain where airlines don't have any pricing power upstream. Yeah, there's sort of mostly oligopolies upstream, very little competition. So we pay high prices for our services that we buy. And downstream, there's intense price competition because there's instantaneous price discovery on the consumer side. So we compete on price downstream, and we can't influence prices upstream. That is part of why airlines as an industry have a low profit margin. Now that, of course, any average, will obviously hide the great variation around that average. So we clearly have a number of airlines that are very profitable, and then many airlines that are not very profitable, and the majority of airlines that hover around the plus and minus line, I would say. Long middle curve, and then a few who are loss-making and a few who are profit-making.
One of the reasons why the sector should grow in 2025 is because oil prices are very low at the moment compared to 2023, for instance. But there are many geopolitical tensions in major oil producers such as Russia and Iran. Can that harm the projections for 2025?
Yeah, oil prices are notoriously volatile, and the oil market is very sensitive to supply and demand imbalances. Small imbalances provoke big price variations. So I'm not at all precluding that we can have price spikes in 2025. But I do believe that the trend is for lower oil prices than we had previously. A structural phenomenon is a demand shift, that various industries are shifting away from demanding oil-refined products and favor instead liquid natural gas. For instance, the trucking industry, long-haul trucking industry, and notably in China. That's a large country, that makes a big difference, and that has had an impact on oil prices already, as they use less diesel and more natural liquid gas. So this is a structural phenomenon that will spread. And then the more contemporaneous phenomenon is, of course, the incoming Trump administration and their declared desire to pump as much oil as possible. And we should all realize that the world is pumping more oil than ever before. Yet, record high levels of oil output. So the market is already oversupplied. And into that, you have these demand shifts and, an aggressive supply policy from the U.S. That sounds like the market is going to stay oversupplied, and that will put a downward pressure on the price of oil.
Talking specifically about Brazil, in 2024, Brazil has reached the position of the fourth biggest market of airline aviation in the world. Will it be able to keep that position over the next years?
I think demography suggests that should be the case. Brazil's population is young and growing, as opposed to Japan's, which is obviously older and not growing. So the question for Brazil then is can Brazil generate higher incomes for this growing population so that the population can afford to travel in the future? That would be the key question here. So, of course, a sound economic policy that promotes growth in general would guarantee that position, I believe, for Brazil. And that sound economic policy, I also believe, could usefully recognize the catalytic effect of aviation, not only aviation, all forms of mobility and transportation and connectivity, but we're talking aviation here. So aviation is a absolutely necessary ingredient to allow all other economic activity to happen and flourish and realize all other industries' full potential. That's often overlooked. We often look just at the share of GDP or share of jobs, which is already an important indicator. But the more important indicator is how much growth are we enabling the rest of the economy to do through the services that air transportation provides. And that could usefully be maximized not only in Brazil, but across the globe, to understand what an important growth lever transportation is in general. And now we're talking about aviation in particular.
So in your opinion, the main challenge in Brazil would be, to keep growing and also to have a sound policy towards air companies, right?
Absolutely. In many lower income countries, it's obviously a big problem for them to find a tax base that they can tax, to be able to provide the services that their countries need. So that's a perennial problem, of course, in low income countries. And there's therefore a temptation to sort of obviously tax everything that moves, and maybe that habit has stayed a little bit with Brazil, and. But I think that now there are plenty of other options for the general budget. So how does Brazil conduct its tax policy for the economy in general? That's an interesting question. And I would then again argue that one cannot approach taxation of aviation as if it were a cash cow. Yeah, because if you tax something, the activity tends to decline. If you have a diminishing activity in the aviation sector, that will have this catalytic impact also on all other industries. You are therefore reducing your growth potential. And I would encourage everybody to try to have a neutral tax terrain for all industries to allow all industries to realize their full potential.
Well, Brazil is going through a major tax reform. Is IATA observing what's going on?
Well, we do our best to keep tabs on policies that affect our industry everywhere. But I guess I would have to admit to having a special focus on the sustainability policies and how, of course, we can address the main preoccupation of our industry, arguably these days, which is how the industry can fly net zero in 2050.
Well, Brazil has approved a bill called Combustível do Futuro, Fuel of the Future, in English. How has IATA seen that? Like, it should encourage and incentivize the production of biofuels.
Yes, absolutely. I think, the challenge for the world is obviously to the extent that we attach value to the signatories of the Paris Agreement, yeah? Then we think the world has set itself this goal of being able to replace a vast amount of fossil fuels with renewable fuels. So what we want is maximum amount of renewable fuels for everybody. And then airlines just want to have their share of those future renewable fuels. And it's actually a surprisingly small share. Today, airlines take 8% approximately of fossil fuel-based refined output. And the vast majority is obviously diesel for road transportation and heating oil for our homes. So with only 8% of refined output, we are sort of not necessary in the fuel producers' profit maximization equation. Yeah, we are easily ignored by the fuel producers. And that's why we're trying to make a lot of noise so that they have to hear that don't forget about us in your biofuel production, and please help us make sure that we have the sustainable aviation fuel we need for our transition and for everybody's benefit and for the global economy by 2050.
There's a rule in Brazil where you have to be, in order to operate an airline company in the country, you got to be based in the country. How does IATA see this kind of rule?
Well, I'm an economist by training, and I believe in free markets and competition. We have seen throughout economic history that those types of policies are the ones that have indeed yielded the best economic outcomes when the markets are allowed to, not to be unregulated, but where market forces are allowed to operate, and we encourage new entrants into markets. And then obviously that means that, probably some of those companies will fail. And this churn tends to be sort of a creative engine, if you wish, for economies. So on the face of it, I would say, it's a good thing to allow more people into a market. It tends to lower the prices and improve the quality of the product or service that's being provided.
Well, talking about CEF, why is it not growing as fast as it should? IATA said CEF's results in 2024 were disappointing.
Yeah, so we try to the best of our abilities to really do due diligence on the SAF projects that get announced, and then we count what looks real and try to ignore, the ones that don't look real. And on our tally, at one point we were thinking, maybe we could reach 1.5 million tons, but now we've revised that down to 1 million for this year, and that's obviously disappointing. Yeah, that's a 30% undershoot. So clearly the acceleration of the SAF production is not happening the way we want it. And if you then look at the curve sort of how much acceleration we need in the future, it's challenging now to get to where we're going to need to be in 2030, but it's going to be infinitely more challenging past 2030 and past 2040 when the increases really need to be exponential. But I do think that Brazil is a uniquely well-placed country to help us and everybody with the renewable energy production. And there's feedstock and there's the energy sector, which is very well developed and lots of expertise in Brazil. So I think the ingredients are clearly there for Brazil to play a really important role in renewable energy production in general, and then therefore for our little slice of that in aviation, as well as in the carbon offsetting market, where nature positive projects can be developed, and if they meet certain criteria, then they can be used by the airline industry to meet their offsetting obligations. So I would really hope to see lots of such future potential offering coming out of Brazil. And, let's be crazy, yeah? Why can't we think that Brazil could be the world's first net negative CO2 producing country? That would be amazing. That's what I'm hoping for, at least.
Well, one of the reasons why SAF is not growing in Brazil is because there are many limitations, especially imposed by Europe on the feedstocks, like sugarcane and soybeans cannot be used for the SAF they are willing to purchase. Will that change sometime soon?
Well, I cannot predict that at all, and I do think that, for now we have to be happy that we are getting the specifications out that we are getting out, and look forward to more and more such specifications being adopted and allowed. That is definitely one of the things that we're pushing for, to increase the number, the various forms of feedstock that we are allowed to use in this process, and to increase also the various forms of production technologies that can be used. So for sure, there's an administrative break on the SAF production increases, as well as all of these certifications and standards are being developed. And of course, they are hugely important, because we don't get any second chances with airplanes. So safety has to come first. But at the same time, the regulator has to try to keep up with the scientific developments in order to enable the goal that we have all set ourselves. So that too is challenging. I thank you for hitting the nail on that point, that without accelerated approvals, it will also be very difficult for us to meet our goals.
Okay, well, you mentioned regulation, and Europe is constantly criticized by IATA for its over-regulation. So can that scenario, like of over-regulating, negatively influence the market of airline, like the aviation markets?
Yeah, thank you for that question too, because, this is now 80 years since ICAO was created. And ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization, the specialized agency in the UN system that oversees aviation and has countries as members. Whereas we, IATA, we have airlines as members, and we are sort of from the outset designed to work together and deliver global civil aviation to the world. And this came out of the Chicago Convention, which already during the Second World War, understood that aviation is necessary for peace and prosperity in the world. That's why they set about creating a global civil aviation industry. Very inspired, right? These people were true visionaries. And what they also said was that there's a need for everybody to be able to provide these services on equal terms. The need for sort of a level playing field, as we would say in economics. That the more harmonized regulation that we can achieve around the globe, the better the civil aviation system will be. Because you don't have to optimize your operations in function of somebody's rule and regulation over here. And this is uniquely important for airlines, because airlines fly everywhere, every day, all the time. So a little change in one small area of the universe will impact the whole global aviation network. And I think that that's perhaps something that often regulators don't really take into account. When they try to approach global civil aviation as a national policy issue, that's, a recipe for fragmentation and for suboptimal operational choices. Just a thing like overflight charges, of course. Yeah, if your shortest route to a destination, it has significantly higher overflight charges than a longer route. Well, we can't really fault the airlines for choosing maybe the longer route. Obviously, it depends on the fuel cost and so on. But and that's obviously not what we want in terms of CO2 emissions. Yeah, so we should help the industry make the optimal choices by trying to work in favor of globally harmonized rules and regulations for aviation. Yeah,
For sure. One very last question. Well, the goal of IATA is to have a decarbonized aviation system by 2050. Is it feasible?
Yes, it's entirely feasible, technically, financially, and so on. I think what's really missing is somehow the clarity of purpose and the unity of minds. The world has said, yes, we stand behind this by signing the Paris Agreement and so on. But then, it's clearly a case of, in their case, that they are not doing what they are saying that they want others to do. Yeah. So the world as a whole is still subsidizing fossil fuel production straight into the bottom line of the fuel companies to the height of $1 trillion a year. Yeah. The fuel companies make maybe 20% net profit margins. They do not need that help.
Mm-hmm.
They can stand on their own 2 feet and they will survive without those subsidies. Yeah. And on the other hand, we have the renewable energy companies that are trying to obviously produce renewable energy, not benefiting from those similar subsidies. So the whole thing is skewed. Yeah, the investment proposition is skewed in favor of oil. And this is despite the world leaders telling us that we must make more renewable energy. So that is a bit of the big elephant, I believe, in the room that we must address. And that sadly, I observe they choose not to address. There was no statements about reducing fossil fuel subsidies out of COP29. And there were no statements out of G20 either to reduce fossil fuel subsidies. So it's really a case of we must hit the Paris Agreement targets being announced loudly while they're all standing with their fingers crossed behind their backs. Yeah.
Well, COP30 will be in Brazil next year. Do you expect that some sort of announcement will be made?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I can only really hope so, because obviously if we can't make it economically viable to invest in renewable energy, then nobody will invest in renewable energy. And the thing is that the world managed to make it economically viable for wind and solar. Yeah, that happened. A lot of support went into wind and solar, and the amounts of support that went into those two industries is very similar to the amount of support that we think needs to go into production of renewable energy, and of course SAF in particular. But so it's nothing extraordinary that this is just another creation of a new energy market. Obviously it's an endeavor, but we've done it as a world several times before. We know how much money needs to be put to that purpose. We know pretty much the policies that need to be directed for that purpose, and yet we are not seeing that happening. That's the big elephant in the room right now.
Marie, in the name of Poder 360, I thank you very much for this interview.
It's been a great pleasure. Hope to see you again.
E para você que acompanha o Poder 360, não se esqueça de assinar a nossa página e ativar os sininhos para que você receba todas as nossas notificações. Obrigado e até a próxima.
Poder Monitor. Acesse agora e ganhe 30 dias grátis.